Okay, thank you very much. My name is Pam Doran, and I am going to be discussing how to mitigate linguistic segregation in our schools using machine translation. And for my presentation, I will be including machine translation using PowerPoint Live, which is something that is available in most schools using Microsoft. Linguistic segregation is something that exists. We have addressed segregation by race in our schools for the most part, but when we divide our students based on what language they speak and give them separate instruction, we're denying them the opportunity of an immersive language experience and an authentic cultural exchange. And the number of students who speak different languages in our schools is growing exponentially. If we look at this data from the US Department of Education, across the nation, the number of students who speak different languages in our schools is up to 10%. And in New York, it shows 9.1%. This data is from 2018, the number is growing. And we separate our English language students, from our English speaking students. They're being denied a social capital and a sense of community with their schools. It is in our best interest to do everything we can to keep classrooms together and not divide the students by language. But this is a challenge when you have instructors who are monolingual, especially in rural areas or smaller areas where they don't have a robust language support system. In larger schools like Peekskill, New York, they have dual language programs because they have the benefit of bilingual teachers. And they are finding that keeping the students together is getting rid of a costly challenge of providing separate support and additional staffing. And it is benefiting both students, English-speaking students and foreign language students who don't speak English, that they're starting to learn each other's languages. The dual language programs have the instruction done in math and in English in the first day. The next day they will switch to Spanish, and then they will swap back and forth. Now, for schools that have monolingual teachers and they don't have this benefit, some are using machine translation. And they're finding success using Google Translate, Microsoft Translate, different machine translation services. And it's incorporated into individual practices and lessons, but it's not necessarily part of school policy to use the machine translations. In Hong Kong, they're starting to do a lot of research on the benefits of using machine translation in the classrooms. They find that if they're using Google Translate in order to increase their literacy, for instance, they will write their sentence in English and then write the same sentence in Google Translate in their native language and compare the two texts. They're finding that students are getting more advanced vocabulary, they're starting to make fewer spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, and it's supporting their literacy instruction. And if we consider that in most schools, high school students are not allowed to have their cell phones in the classroom, with that policy in place of saying, hey, let them do that, they can have the ease of portability, they have their camera lens, they have the ability to have the machine translation right there in their pocket, ready to be used. But what about accuracy? Prior to 2017, the accuracy was, I would say, sketchy at best. They said, but today, because the technology is getting more robust, it's easier to use, that they're saying that machine translations can be superior for their learning students when they're participating in their students. And it also gives them the immediacy and the ability to advocate for themselves when they can communicate in their target language. One-to-one devices are available. It doesn't always have to be just translation in text. They can hear the translations in their ears. Teachers wear a set, students wear a set, and as a one-to-one device, the students will have the opportunity to use this. There are some case studies where this has been done well. In Chickalit, Texas, They are using Time Kettle, which is the device I showed in the previous slide. And they're finding that the students are learning together all at once. They're not waiting for translation or help in their own language. They're all on the same page. In another school in New Jersey, in Palisades Park, they've rolled out Ambassador from Waverly Labs. And these were bought with a $5,000 grant, technology grant for the school. And this teacher, Natalie Konsensky, had a classroom of 80% English language learners. And she states it was emotional. There's no boundaries now. She can open up so many doors for her students. And if this technology is a one-to-one device, the devices can be taken home. The students' parents can use them. They can be part of assisting with homework, getting part of the social aspects of their schools. It's always better to have a human translator, but in comparison, machine translation and artificial intelligence software is cheaper, it's more readily available, and with the growing number of students who are English language learners in our schools, we're going to have the volume that's going to outpace what we can do with human translation. Our current Commissioner regulations address English language learners and supporting them, but nowhere does it specifically mention turning on or using machine language translations. Additionally, Title III language says to upgrade relevant programs, improve educational programs related to language instruction, but nowhere does it say include machine language translation. Our digital fluency standards for both teachers and students, or in the ITSE standards, can cover using machine language translation in this language here, but never is it specifically identified or said to be turned on. Our E-rate program, if machine language translations was included in the E-rate program, like it is with cybersecurity, teachers are required to do PD on cybersecurity. If it's part of the E-rate program, they could be required to learn how to use machine language translation, which would solve the problem of not knowing this technology exists. It's right there in their back pocket, in their cell phones, ready to be used. And it wouldn't cost much. Title III already covers some very valuable and important programs, but machine language translation, like this Coursera course, is free. The only thing it would cost would be the time for the teachers spent into their PDs to learn how to use the technology. And of course, human translation is always the best, and it can't replace human translation, but this could increase productivity. If students can at least get 60% of comprehension, they now have the ability to ask questions. When they don't have any kind of language support in the moment, teachers lose the opportunity of immediacy. They lose the opportunity to teach in the moment. We have the ability for text translation for students who can't read or in their language, our own language. There is audio supports for the translation services. And once again, they are already there. They're in the Google Suite. They are in the Microsoft Suite. They just need to be turned on by default as a universal design. They don't have to ask for the translation, it should be waiting for them. And the reason why, even though the language could cover this, we need to explicitly say machine language translation in these policies, because in order to have that vision and the buy-in, the schools and the school districts need to be told it's there, turn it on, please, so we can move on to the skills. Give them the incentive to use it when they see that they can reach their students, they can reach their parents. And then the resources and the action plan and the assessment can all build after that. But until machine language translation is specifically mentioned in those policies, we can't move forward. And these are my references, and I am ready for questions.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I'll start off with a couple of questions. First one, a practical one, just to make sure I understand, because I'm fascinated by the technology. But if you think about school districts where there are kids that speak dozens, if not hundreds of different languages, is the technology capable? Does it depend on what device the student is using? Because then it can be tailored to whatever language they speak. because I was thinking if it's just one projection, obviously it seems like you can only choose one language. So how is it that it can accommodate multiple students? Is it depending on whatever device they're using, laptop, phone, etc.? How does that work?
Excellent question. It can be done. Like, for instance, I was just projecting in Spanish using this technology, which is the Microsoft PowerPoint, and also Google Translate has this. It displays a QR code, which someone can then scan with their device, and they can choose whichever language they want. So if there was an assembly where you had students from Brazil, students from different Spanish, Mandarin, they could all watch their own translation. And some of them even go as deep where they'll go into the dialects. Google Translate and Google Microsoft won't just give you Latin American Spanish. You can have Ecuadorian Spanish. You can have Chilean Spanish. You can go deep into the different dialects, especially Time Kettle. The Time Kettle headphones as well will listen for English, not just, if you're in the South, or if you're upstate New York and you have a special dialect of English, it will even detect that and make sure the dialects are correct.
Okay, thank you. That answers the practical question. Is there any research to show that this also enhances the students learning English? I would think it would, because you obviously have them engaged. They're going to be more engaged. They're being spoken to we're speaking to their listening, but also it seems as if by hearing both of these going at the same time, their spoken word, the written word, and then the other written language in their own. Is there any evidence to support that this increases their ability to learn English?
Yes, the research out of Hong Kong for the English language learners shows that yes, it does help them acquire the language faster. And also importantly, it helps prevent backslide. So if a student is an excellent math student in Ecuador and they don't have a math student in their school where it can teach them in their language, they could have backslide. They could have a dream of being a chemist, but they'll be taught rudimentary math because that's at the language level that they can be instructed in.
And my final question is, what would be your recommendation if New York were to focus on one or two aspects to enhance this? What are the top two things that New York could do to move this forward?
The top two things would be to turn on the language translation by default. So all websites could have the link where it could be swapped on. Any worksheets, any problems, everything could be run through machine translation. And also that PD is rolled out across New York State to all staff, teachers, and service providers, so they learn how to use this technology. As a quick example, we had a lockdown drill here, and there was a student that I needed to pull aside and help hide. And this child only spoke Spanish. I had my cell phone with me. I was able to take my cell phone out and reassure this child who understood some of the portions that this was a dangerous situation, that it was a drill. And I was able to bring this child calmly into my office, close the door, and they were able to understand this complex, hard situation. Any teacher could do this with training because the software is there. It's in Google. It's Google Translate and Microsoft are in all of our schools. It's there. It's just not turned on and there's no awareness. The policy change would increase awareness and start rolling it out.
Well, a final comment then. So thank you for all of that. It seems as if we had had this 2 years ago, we would not be in the situation we are now with all the remote learning we've been doing. It still is going to present a problem for rural areas and other places where there's low bandwidth, though. I would think that that's going to be another hindrance. So
it could be, but also both of those products allow for offline. So once they're connected to a strong connection, you can have the online translations downloaded onto the phones. So I live rural. I live in Columbia County. I know this. So I speak to a lot of Spanish population in farm communities. And what I do is I have it downloaded onto my device so I can use it in the middle of a cornfield, acres away from a hotspot.
Thank you.
Great.
Sure.
Kate, do you have a question?
Yeah, Jeff's later questions got at some of mine, but is there a, a financial, is there a budgetary, like have you put forward or thought about how much it would cost to?
The only
something.
real cost is if they wanted to roll out the headphones and the headsets. And like that one school, they bought 30 headsets. It was $5,000 with a technology grant. But the other items, Google Translate, Microsoft Translate, it's already built in. The apps are free on both phones and iPads, any device. So even if some schools had to bring your own device, there would be no cost to them, and there would be no impact on the IT departments because these are all plugins and parts that are already in the software. They're just not turned on by default. They just have to change the image and make it that they're on when they roll it out to the computers. So it's not high cost at all. It's really more awareness than it is a monetary concern for taxpayers.
This is a great presentation. Thank you. And I feel like I'm learning a lot. I also feel like a lot of teachers wouldn't want kids on their phones, and you kind of alluded to that. Is there a way to kind of solve that problem, or you just got to deal with it?
That's a case by case situation. It's going to be school by school as well. Yeah, when you're talking with any student using a personal device, I mean, it could be a student who's autistic and they're using Proloquo. You know, they also have the option of switching over and going to a game instead of communicating or staying with school. Items like the iPad, you can put it on guided access, so it's locked to the translation software. So there are workarounds if you have a student who can't be engaged or stay focused on that. So there are ways to mitigate that, but those items are already in the schools in order to have guided access and stuff like that. So you're really not asking for additional software or additional, it's just IT departments know how to lock it down.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Pam.